Okay, we are live. Brian Wetzel from Philly. Thank you so much for joining me. This is awesome. I'm really glad we've got the chance to sit down and chat right now. This is great. As I was just telling you, I have spent the last few days just going through all of the images on your Instagram and on your website. And if you haven't had a chance to the APAlmanac readers to check out Brian's work, I absolutely encourage you to do it. He has got just a gorgeous collection of editorial images, tons of natural light. And what strikes me is you have a really strong sense of the form and the function of each space. There is an authenticity to the textures, the materials, the colors, and even just the scale of each space that you shoot. So I love your work. You have an impeccable attention to detail when it comes to the staging of your images. It's actually really inspiring to see how you've done that. And so we'll get into who does that and how you do it and all that sort of stuff. But your images they have the kind of the right amount of realism in the staging without it looking either messy or contrived. So that's pretty cool. And your lighting, it's just super soft. It's really inviting. They're always just these kinds of shots where you can imagine curling up with a book and reading next to this beautiful, big window, soft, comfy couch. You just really get a feeling from each one of your images. So it was a pleasure to go through all of your shots, and I'm really happy that you've taken the time to sit down and chat with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I did a little bit of reading. You started as a music publisher and a composer, and then you were managing a photo studio for a while. How did you make that transition into architecture and design photography?
Yeah, I was working at a photography studio for quite a long time, and that's kind of where I started to get sense of photography professionally. So that's how I kind of knew the way around the camera. I worked at the studio. I understood the business a little bit, clients, things like that, dealing with clients, billing. And a friend of mine, actual ex-girlfriend, was moving, and she shot this type of work and actually referred me to my first client when she left. And that's how I got started shooting design, which was it was interior design clients about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And yeah, I just kind of picked it up and didn't really think too much of it, to be honest. At the time, it was kind of like, oh, getting paid to take photos, this is cool, and ran with that. But over time, as I worked with them more and more and slowly took on more clients, I actually realized that the genre is a really good fit for my personality. The sort of slow pace, attention to detail, kind of meticulous, camera on the tripod, camera attached to the laptop, that type of process really suited my personality.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the opposite might be like shooting weddings, which is just like run and gun, bang, bang, bang. The moment is there and you got to catch it right in that moment. And if you missed it, you missed it. It's a very shooting from the hip style,
Yeah.
which really doesn't suit my personality. So I kind of like learned that, and then over time just slowly embraced it more and more, and really just fully embraced it, really. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And we'll get into I have all these questions going through my head about how many shots do you find you're getting in an hour, but we'll dive into all that sort of stuff later. But now you're in a world that I'm not familiar with at all, really. It seems to me that you're very much an editorial photographer. So I'm really curious to know how that all works. Are you mostly shooting for architects and designers, or are you shooting for the actual publications themselves? Maybe walk me through how that industry works.
Yeah, I primarily shoot for interior designers. I do work with some architects for sure, but definitely almost all interior designers. And I think that just lends itself to, like you said, that editorial look, trying to create that feeling and that emotion of actually being in the space, not just documenting it, but capturing it in a way that makes you feel like either you could be there or that somebody was just there and they just left and they're going to be coming right back. Just trying to create that feeling. And I feel like those are just the most compelling images. And for me, it brings me the most creative satisfaction. And then for my clients, ideally, promotes their work and markets their work in the best way possible, because they can stir up that feeling in people looking at their design and say, I want to work with that designer.
Yeah. Okay. And how do you find that most clients come to you? Would you say it's through referral, repeat business, that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, referral, repeat business, definitely. I think that Instagram is really powerful for photographers, especially in this genre.
Hmm.
All of my clients give me photo credit in the comments, so they're almost like my brand ambassadors in a way. Whereas they're sharing the work, my name is kind of is my name is attached to it, and people can see um, can see my name and see who's actually doing the work. And yeah, I think that's super powerful. So I get a lot of inquiries where people say they have come through Instagram, or just have been referred by a designer and say, "Oh, this designer I work with highly recommended you," that kind of thing.
Okay. And do you require clients to tag you, put you in the body text of Instagram posts, that sort of, is that a discussion you have ahead of time?
It's actually not usually a discussion that I actually have. It's kind of like a sort of an unwritten rule almost, or an unspoken rule. I think that they all, and if they don't, then I'll mention it for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, they all see each other uh, crediting the photographers, and I'll police it a little bit. Like I hate that term and I hate that job title. But yeah, if somebody's reposting something, literally anybody, I'll say, hey, would you please, add my photo credit.
Oh, okay.
Didn't do that this morning, unfortunately.
Uh, that's interesting that you've found that people tend to do it by default, because that hasn't necessarily been my experience. Although I tend to work more in a commercial world.
Mhm.
So I suppose for you in more of an editorial world, perhaps like you said, that's kind of the norm. You credit the photographer.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and do you find that when you get reached out by these interior designers, are they coming to you for your unique look, or have they just generally heard great things? Brian's an awesome guy to work with. He's super nice. Like, why are they coming to you?
That's a good question. I can never know 100% for sure, but reading between the lines and picking up clues, I think it's definitely partially due to the look, because they have they almost all mention have looking at some work before, or seeing certain images, or mentioning something specific about the work. One thing more recently, so I work with a stylist. Almost exclusively, or I'm trying to make it as exclusive as possible.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier about the staging and things like that. I can only take credit for only a small part of that. A big part of that is the stylist that I work with. Her name's Christy, super talented, and we're kind of have become a duo. So a lot of people will be looking to hire us as a pair,
Okay.
because they've seen our work together. Again, she's getting credit as well on Instagram. So these people on social media are scrolling and they're seeing our names side by side pretty often.
I see.
And so I think that that creates some synergy. And then sometimes people will come to me and I say, we can work with me, but I want to work with Christy, or they'll go to her and she'll say, I'm happy to work with you, but we'd like to work with Brian, kind of a thing. So yeah, I think people are familiar with the work. Ideally, they have heard good things, and yeah.
So how does that work? You've got a stylist, and you're going into an interior designer or decorator's space, and you said Christy.
Yes.
She's
Mhm.
kind of moving things around, presumably moving tchotchkes and furniture and whatever else. So how do your designers and decorators respond to that?
Yeah. So if they're kind of unfamiliar with that concept, the way I break it down is that the way the designers work is very much in a three-dimensional space, and they design spaces for somebody to physically walk into the room and experience that space in three dimensions.
Sure.
But a big part of my job is to be kind of a translator of taking that three-dimensional experience and and compressing it down to a two-dimensional experience that can be shared digitally throughout the internet. And that's not really that easy of a process, right?
Sure.
Like, how many times have somebody taken a photo and they say, "Oh, it looks so much better in person," or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So that's our job, is to try and to bridge that gap as good as possible. And that's where I say, myself and the stylist, we're used to working in the two-dimensional space. That's our realm.
Mm-hmm.
And to go from that three-dimensional space where the designer lives to the two-dimensional space of photography, she gets it, right? The stylist gets it.
Sure.
That she understands the concepts with optics and things like that, and how to try and make that translate and make that transition. Um, and yeah, I basically just sell them that idea that there's a big hurdle there, and that most likely they've encountered it themselves. You know, they're reaching out to a professional photographer. Of course, they've taken some shots of the space on their phone or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, they know that that's not cutting it. Maybe they just don't know why, but they know it's not working. So I think when I explain it to them, they go, "Okay, you know, that makes sense." And yeah, the stylist, she'll use what's there for sure, but very often she'll bring her own things as well,
Oh, okay.
based on like a mood board or something like that. And definitely some greenery, florals,
Mm-hmm.
branches, that kind of stuff as well. Some things that are alive, to just sort of bring it to life a little bit. And yeah, just helping that translation into the two-dimensional world.
Yeah, no, certainly the translation part makes sense. I guess I'm curious if you guys ever show up on set without the client necessarily present, and Christie's introducing a bunch of new things, and then later on the client says, "Oh, I hate that vase" or something. Do you ever run into those kind of circumstances?
Sure. I mean, the word hate is a bit strong, but a lot of that work gets kind of flushed out ahead of time, I think,
Okay.
with a mood board or inspiration or style guides or that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even going through the client's website and just understanding their aesthetic. You know, are they modern? Are they transitional? Are they traditional? Are they maximalists? Are they minimalists?
Yeah.
And just interpreting their vibe and their style, and not bringing a different style to it, rather taking their style and building upon it, I think, is a way to think about it.
Yeah, yeah, no, interesting. And reading through a lot of your comments, your quotes that are associated with Instagram, you obviously know a lot about interior design. How did you learn that? Was that just through experience and trial and error, or did you study interior design?
No, no, I didn't study at all. It's definitely been experience and trial and error. I remember early on, like a designer mentioned the word sconce, and I'm like, "What's a sconce?" And you know, it's a light that goes like against the wall, like a vertical wall. And I just, I think that was when I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's a ton of terminology, like a ton." And I just ask a lot of questions. I think the clients that I've worked with for a long time would probably say that, like, yeah, he asks a lot of questions.
Okay.
Just trying to understand terminology and the difference between things, and saying, oh, you know, if that piece of furniture is mid-century, like what makes it mid-century, or what about the house makes it modern or makes it mid-century? Just kind of chatting, because you're together for a long time. You know, a whole day could be 10 to 12 hours. So you're chatting while you're working as well. So yeah, just trying to learn a lot about their world, so that I can speak in their language and understand what they do.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And would you say that your passion still remains in the realm of photography, or is it kind of transitioned a little bit more where you're really intrigued and passionate about interior design?
I don't think definitely the passion is in the photography. It's not quite in design in terms of passion,
Mm-hmm.
but I find it very interesting, very intriguing. Starting to do some things around the house and realizing it's not as easy as it looks. I'm actually shocked, the amount of hours I spend around this stuff, talking about it, looking at it, moving things around, seeing the number of spaces I see. Then I come home and want to do something to my space, and I'm like, this is actually hard. Like, even though how much I've seen of it, it's still it's a skill, right?
Sure.
So part of it being very creative and just sort of having an eye for textures, tones, color, and those things. But then they're also doing technical stuff as well, um, things like CAD and SketchUp and things like that as well too. So
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, like I said, your work is beautiful, and to me, it almost seems it seems like you've been an interior designer your whole life and decided to get into photography because you seem to know a lot about it, and just and maybe it goes back to the stylist as well, but just the placement of things is just like I said, impeccable. Maybe you can walk us through a little bit of your pre-production process. Do you do a scout? It seems to me that a lot of your images you've timed the lighting exceptionally well, and I wonder, do you go into a place pre-shoot and sort of think, at this time the sun's going to hit here nice, or I want to shoot this opposite to the sun because I want a soft look? How are you kind of assessing your locations and the timing with regard to your lighting?
Yeah, it's always really challenging. It's interesting when clients send scouting shots to myself and the stylist, we're looking at completely different things. I'm usually just looking at the windows, just to understand how much light I can expect to get. And a lot of times we'll go on Google Maps or Google Earth, look at it from a satellite, and I can usually orient the house sort of northeast south based on the photos and just get a general idea of what I might expect in certain rooms at certain times of the day. Easier said than done, but at least gives me a little bit of a gist. And then we always do, when we get to the location, we'll always do a walkthrough of the whole space. I'll have a rough shot list ahead of time. It could be as specific as really the exact shots, or it could be as vague as just a room and a certain number of shots for the room, but at least something to work from. So I'm looking at that while we walk through the space. And I'm just kind of looking what I think the sun's going to do, the arc it's going to take. I do have an app that's really nice that does this sort of virtual reality thing where you can look through the phone and it's like you're looking through the camera, but then it will overlay an arc, the line that the sun would take with timing and stuff like that. So I'll try and use that, but I don't lean into it too crazy. I don't have a ton of hard light in my photos. I love hard light when it works,
Sure,
but it can just be a bear to tame. And when it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. And then also the shots take long enough where the sun will start in one place at the beginning of the shot, but by the end, it moves significantly. Honestly, in an hour, the sun can really just totally change in a room.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't really characterize myself as a light chaser.
Okay.
I've tried a little bit, and I really respect photographers that are able to do that well, because it's hard.
Yeah. So you'd consider maybe yourself a bit more of an opportunist. Oh, the light looks great here. Let's go to this shot.
Yeah, opportunist or craftsman, maybe. Just shaping it, taking what I've got and shaping it, and knowing where I want to be or where I think I can be, and figuring out how I can get there. Okay. I'm definitely not afraid to manipulate the light at all. I have a sort of a bag of tricks. I wouldn't call them tricks, really. Bag of things or tricks, whatever. And not afraid to manipulate it and just try and get where I need to be to get the shape I want. I mean, basically the formulas I wanted to, not formula, but the goals, the characteristics I want to achieve are, I want it to look as natural as possible and to just create as much shape as possible. It's kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier, 3-dimensionality versus 2-dimensionality. Really want to be able to see gradients and see shadows and see shape, so the viewer has a really good idea of the shape of a vessel or shelf or something, because one side will be in shadow and one will be in light, and it gives you that sense of 3-dimensionality, even though it's only 2-dimensional. So totally. Stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that really soft light that you often use is a big reason why you get a real sense of texture from your images, and why you see all those just fine details in whatever fabric it might be.
Yeah, definitely lots of soft light in my photography, for sure. Definitely.
Yeah. No, and I love that. I think it looks really nice. And so just going back a little bit, do you do a scout typically, or are you just getting sort of images of a space and you show up sight unseen?
Yeah, not typically. The scout, if you will, is usually the images they'll send ahead of time, okay, and then a little bit of homework that I do. But within maybe this is in contrast to what you do, is with interiors you have a lot more ability to just manipulate the light, create light, things like that. If you're doing exteriors, you're just at its mercy, you know. When I do some exteriors as well, and I do work for architects. And when that happens, yeah, very, very opportunistic, looking at the sun and the clouds. And for exteriors, I might jump, even maybe I only need one or two exteriors, but I might jump out two, three, four times during the day to
Hmm.
try and catch it at different times. And also, a lot of times I might think something's going to happen and it just doesn't. Or I might think something won't happen and it does. So just by surely having, just being shooting more often gives me more opportunities to catch it at a good time.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And I think I read somewhere that when you show up on a site, you usually take your 24/70 and you just run around and see what kind of works, what framing works. At that same time, I assume Christie's maybe assessing furniture placement, placement of decor, that sort of stuff. You guys work in tandem that way, or?
Yeah, we work in tandem. It's very much like a conversation, a back and forth, kind of a ping pong. She typically won't start moving very much until we know what the shot is.
Sure.
So I'll usually approach it room by room, and yeah, I'll take the 24 to 70, and I'll walk around the room, shoot a ton of different angles, a lot of different ways, a lot of variations, variety.
Hmm.
Quickly fly through it on capture one and just star the ones that I think might have some potential. And then I'll go through that sort of like ultra rough selects, if you will, of those shots with the client and with Christy. And then we'll look at what we think has the most promise and the most potential. And sometimes it's, what's the best photograph, but sometimes it's about what the interior designer has done that we really need to showcase.
Yeah.
Maybe it's some expensive millwork or a particular light fixture or, whatever it might be. It's not always obvious to me just walking to the space what the most important things are.
Yeah.
I'll definitely be surprised sometimes by what's really important or what might not be as important. So yeah, so we'll go through that sort of like very rough list, and then we'll kind of hone it down to the shots that we actually want to deep dive into and pursue, and then we'll go onto the tripod, and that's when Christy will tend to start moving items around, is once we can see it through the lens and framed up, and then work just to the actual image itself. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, that sounds good. You're reminding me of the times that I have shot with interior designers. I find that when you go in the beginning and you kind of walk around the space and they're telling you about the things that they're doing, you can get a lot of hints from that initial conversation, because I've found that often they'll bring up certain things a couple of times or two or three times, and then it sort of clicks in your head. Okay, that's important to them. Obviously, they've brought up that millwork, a few times now, so
Yeah.
it's usually a pretty good hint, just that initial conversation, if you're listening.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very collaborative too. I mean, they're involved kind of the whole time. There's a little bit of like hurry up and wait to it,
Mhm.
but yeah, I really like to collaborate with the client, with the stylist, and try and really get that synergy of everybody's ideas coming together. I don't really approach it like I just pick and that's how it works. I don't work that way.
Yeah, yeah. And I imagine your designer, if they're on site with you, and Christy, they're probably working in close collaboration, looking at the laptop. Let's move this far, and let's move this over
Mhm.
here, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll go into the live view of like Capture One a lot
Mhm.
and move things around in real time, and yeah, a lot of just nudging, a lot of nudging stuff around for sure.
Yeah. No, for sure. And
Swapping things in and out, all that.
yeah, and you do a lot of vignettes, and every one of them is. I'm just looking at your portfolio right here. Like they're just exceptionally produced and beautifully lit too. So, are there any photographers that you look up to for inspiration, that you really love their work?
Oh my goodness, so many. I always have like a running list for sure, and yeah, just constantly kind of referencing it. I'll run into something. I'm like, oh, how would so and so solve this? Maybe one of my favorites, somewhat locally, is Jennifer Hughes.
Oh yes.
She, I would let her speak for herself, but she strikes me as a light chaser for sure, and she is able to really harness that hard light and just make it work. And I don't think she uses a lot of flash, maybe almost at all.
Hmm.
Um, but she just wrangles. I can see that she really just wrangles some very difficult lighting scenarios and just does like a really good job.
Yeah.
That another local I really like is Jason Varney,
Oh.
Philadelphia photographer,
Oh, okay.
uh, who I think is also heavily on the natural light side, just super talented. Yeah, those are two locals that come to mind, but I have a running list at all times. So
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm very familiar with Jennifer Hughes' work. In fact, she's actually on my list of people to contact to talk on
oh,
this
excellent.
venue. Because yeah, no, I love her work. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and the stylist works with her as well, so I get a little
Oh,
bit of a peek into some of the ways she approaches things, and maybe I'll reference specific images that I know that they have collaborated on, and
yeah.
find a little bit of some of the behind the story stuff. But yeah, she's incredibly talented.
Now, have you met her in person?
I haven't. I have not.
Okay, so what's it like in a place like Philadelphia? Is it fairly collaborative? Is there a healthy sense of competition? How does it work in a big city like that?
Good question. My personal sense is that it's pretty collaborative and pretty friendly.
Hmm.
I've reached out to local photographers just to chat and introduce myself, and grabbed coffee or grabbed lunch. And I've also had photographers reach out to me, and
Hmm.
we've done the same thing.
Okay.
I think I actually had dinner with two photographers just last month, just to chat. And maybe probably some of the questions that you'll have along the way are the same kinds of things that we've talked about. How do you handle this? How do you handle that? And I think it's healthy to just the industry is very like there's very few rules,
Hmm.
um, or standards. Maybe standards is a better word. There's very few standards.
Hmm.
Things can be very loose, and people work in different ways, which is fine. But I think it's good for us to all kind of um, share a certain level of information to keep a certain industry standard and understand how people are working and not miss opportunities and not do things that you shouldn't and do things that you should, stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's healthy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think of somebody like Mike Kelly, who is just like open book completely. Whatever you want to know,
Yeah.
he'll tell you, and you'll be honest about it. I feel myself very similar kind of thing. I don't feel like it's worth keeping secrets and trying to hide my proprietary information. It's just a rising tide lifts all boats. So I appreciate that about you, because I've read a couple of articles where you've talked specifically about that, how you've been very thankful to. I think Peter Mollick was one, and other people
Yep.
who've put that information out there, and I agree with you. I think it helps the industry as a whole. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Peter's made some great YouTube videos too during COVID. I'm hoping if he's not super busy, maybe he'll make a few more. I haven't seen a new one in a little while.
yeah, totally, totally. No, but a great resource for the post production end of things. Awesome.
Mhm.
So jumping ahead to the actual shoot stuff, can you tell us
Yeah.
what's in your kit?
Yeah. It's I basically roll with like one kind of large case and one backpack, and that's about it. The backpack's the digital lenses, camera bodies, laptop, that stuff. Two camera bodies, nothing fancy. Canon 5D Mark III. They've been out for a long time, not fancy. Kind of your standard set of tilt shift lenses, three or four. I use my favorite is definitely the 45 for sure. Trying to keep those longer focal lengths and get those tighter, more intimate um, scenes. I
Yeah.
use the 24 to 70 quite a bit.
Oh, okay.
Um, and tethering with Capture One, even if my verticals and stuff are not quite perfect, I can kind of correct them on site in Capture One, and we can still look at a prospectively sound image while we work, even if the camera might technically be a little bit crooked. And then my particular workflow, I do start in Capture One, move over to Photoshop, and come back. So the session that we're shooting to on location is the exact session I'll open up when I get home and start working there.
Okay.
So yeah, and then the big case is it's actually right over here. It's obviously the tripod, of course, some light stands. I have two Profoto 500-watt wireless mono heads and two wireless speed lights.
Hmm.
So four lights total, two 500 watts and two speed light style.
Yep.
Um, two like soft lighter umbrella type things. A bunch of not sexy stuff, clamps and pins and stuff like that. One thing I actually use a lot that is underrated is I have spring curtain rod. They're super cheap. It's the curtain rod you'll kind of, a tension rod, I think it's called. You'll kind of
Yeah.
squeeze it in and then it expands and holds.
Yeah.
I'll put those in windows or all over the place all the time and then clamp silks or blackout or anything to them. I use a lot of silks, a lot of silks. I really like what I can do with silks. I'll use some blackout type material. It's actually just a tablecloth. It's not really truly blackout.
Sure.
Blackout stuff's actually really heavy.
Yep.
And then some foam core. Lots of I have like miniature V flats
Mm-hmm.
and some things like that.
And are
And
those typically the silks and the V flats? Are those typically for bouncing, or actually through with the silks? Are you actually diffusing hard light that way?
yeah, so the silks are used for a variety of uses. One could be just making soft light, like diffusing soft light. So diffusion would be one.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of similar to diffusion is just bending the light.
Mm-hmm.
It will bend it. So a lot of times you might see a room and the light's kind of, coming down at an angle, which you'd expect. And then you get these kind of murky color casts kind of up top because all that light has to bounce and come back up and around.
Mm-hmm.
If you put a silk over the window, it will bend the light and it will bend the light actually up into the ceiling a bit, like quite noticeably actually. And it can really clean up those color casts up there like significantly. Sometimes it can look a little flashy because it's kind of coming in at all angles, kind of like a flash would, whereas the natural light wants to come a little bit more downward.
Yeah.
But really effective for cleaning up color in those kinds of areas. So in that scenario, I'm kind of bending it, but I'm also cleaning it a little bit.
Okay.
Hard light is bouncing off of green trees or a red brick wall outside and then coming in. You can just have you're just starting with a poor quality light in terms of color. And the silks will really help clean a lot of that up quite a bit.
Are you ever putting them outside of windows and actually shooting it in real life through the silk?
Yeah, so might just clean up the existing natural light. I might put it inside. I might put it outside. A scenario that gives me at least a lot of control is when I can put the silk outside and put a light outside and just fire the light in, because then I can really control. I can just have tons of control, the intensity and a bit of the direction, and the silk softens it nicely. So yeah, I do quite a bit of that. I'll even bounce off of silks. The light doesn't bounce off them very well because it goes through it as well, but I'll bounce it off of it. Or you can use it for reflections, maybe. Like if you have kind of a noisy reflection on something like metallic, you can put a silk on the other side of it and kind of clean that reflection up without just going totally like black. Like sometimes a blackout, like cleaning up a reflection on a refrigerator, if I use a piece of blackout, sometimes it's just too dark. It just doesn't look realistic.
Yeah.
So sometimes the silk can work well. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you hit on something that I feel like is a really good one is tablecloths on Amazon. I've got a big box of giant white and black tablecloths, and they're super, super cheap, durable, heavy, like good solid material, and they work really well. They seem to be, especially the white, very color neutral. So that's a good little tip there.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, are you mostly compositing? So you're shooting multiple frames and you're leaving that silk in a part of frame, or are you trying to get it in the one shot?
It really depends. If it's the type of shot where I feel like I can get it in one shot, that would be the preference. But a lot of times, not a lot of times, sometimes it's just not realistic, at least for my style and getting to the place that I want to be. But I do like to try and reduce it to as few frames as possible.
Okay.
But it's usually 2 to 6 or something like that. Maybe I'll use roughly.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I really like doing, I kind of described it earlier, is if you have kind of murky color casts in a room, but the natural light is the direction you want it to be and all those things, you can throw the silk over the window, clean up the color casts, and that can be one frame. And the other one, you could just take the natural light that has the shape of the light that you like, and then take those two, put the shape of the light, the natural light, in like luminosity mode in Photoshop with the cleaner color of the silk frame. And just those two alone, that can be a really powerful combination right there. And then you can just use, opacity slider or whatever to taste, or any of it to taste, to kind of dial it in. But that's that when that happens, that's great. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one thing anyone looking through your portfolio will notice right away. The colors, I mean, without seeing these sets in real life, you just get a sense that the colors are exceptionally accurate and your whites are just a really nice, clean white without being cold white. They're just, and so I wondered if how much of that is achieved in post, or it sounds to me like you're spending a lot of time and effort on site, preventing color casts and shifts and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'm doing as much on site as I can with color.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to like sort of evaluate myself, I feel like color is probably maybe one of my weaknesses. At least I view that in personally. Um, so at least maybe in post at least. So yeah, as good as I can get it on site and trying to tweak the white balance as much as possible to just get it, just find that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do that quite a bit for sure.
Okay.
And yeah, I'll usually start the image like pretty as neutral as possible, like as accurate as possible. And then at the end, warm it up a little bit just to kind of humanize it and make it feel inviting and kind of comforting, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah. I have a lot of questions on the color end of things because I would, from an outsider perspective, I would think that you do it exceptionally well. This is an interesting conversation that I recently had with Kevin Brost a couple of days ago, is about color and knowing whether or not the color you see is accurate relative to everybody else. So one thing we were talking about is how, we have these color calibrated monitors, professionally done, and we see this particular image and then we send it out to our iPad or our laptop or our phone, or it goes out to print and it looks very different. So sometimes what you see, of course, is not what your client's seeing. So how do you reconcile that, at least in your mind, with what is real?
Um, that's a good question. I think one thing that I do quite a bit that I feel like keeps me a little sane is I'll change the background color in Photoshop or in Capture One, and I'll constantly toggle between. So by default, it's like a dark gray or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'll switch it to white quite often because at least then I have white as a reference point of one, brightness, like because most people are going to view it online against white. Even if it was a publication, it's probably against white.
Yep.
So that gives you kind of a reference point right there. And I'll do that throughout the whole process, especially right at the end.
Really?
Like
Okay.
at the end, I'm editing almost just on white, even though it's like kind of harsh on your eyes. And well, yeah, it can be, yeah, it can be like harsh on your eyes, but I'll do it to just make sure that it's close as I can get it to where it's actually going to live in its final state. So that's one thing I'll do a lot. Um, I used to export them a lot and put them on the web to once they're in sRGB and all that stuff, and try and look at them that way. And I was just driving myself kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think that putting them on white has been basically the one big thing that I will do. That's actually part of my actual workflow to just help give me a reference point. Because I at least think of it, even if somebody else's monitor is running warm, then their white would also be running warm. So
Sure.
at least it's
Relative to.
yes, exactly. It's relative. So.
Yeah, yeah. And this is a dumb question, but is there a quick and easy, simple shortcut to toggle through the backgrounds in Photoshop? I haven't. It's not something I've done before. I've always got it at the gray.
Yeah, on both of them, if you just right click on the background, a little drop down menu will pop up that says the color. Okay. I think for Photoshop, you go into custom and you set it for white. You don't have to do that every time. I think once you set it one time, you're good. Then the custom option is white. And the same for Capture One. You just right click on the background and there's a little drop down menu. You can pick the color that you want. They're all neutral.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, the only thing Kevin and I could come up with was we both agreed that we'll often get up from our desk, we'll go, make a tea or something, come back, and just that visual break, you come back to your monitor and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, that was totally obvious and I missed it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'll definitely do that. I'll usually try to get to a point where I consider them like finished in my mind and then put them away. And usually try and come back a different day, like the next day. Yeah. And then try and sit down knowing, okay, I'll do one pass over the whole thing, just tweaks only, try.
Yeah.
And then call it done and then send it out. Yeah, that's for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Another thing that I find is really helpful is just simply scaling down an image to a tiny size. There's something about just having it very small on your monitor, like Instagram size, that suddenly I find other things noticeable as well just by doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I feel like it's almost a curse how much I can zoom in on the image in
Yeah.
Photoshop
Yeah.
because I'll do some retouching and whatnot, and then zoom out and be like, and toggle the change I made. I'm like, can't even see it.
Yeah.
So there's a fine line of knowing how far to go with some of that stuff. The rabbit hole is pretty much infinite.
Totally. And you hit the nail on the head with coming back another day, because I can't tell you how many times I've done that. The client's in a rush. We need the shots by end of day. You deliver everything. And then you just take one more look the next day and you're like, oh, damn it. Now I've got to resubmit, and hopefully it's not too late. Yeah, it's just that extra day. It really helps.
Yeah, definitely. The ones I've rushed, I can think of at least one job in particular that I just powered through, pulled like kind of an all-nighter.
Yeah.
And I even remember making a couple little changes like right at the very end to just the warmth, and just took it too far, kind of in the wrong direction. And like I still see them pop up on Instagram sometimes. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Ugh, just
Yeah.
it's all.
And I think for me, the biggest thing that I end up noticing in situations like that is just the consistency. If you're delivering, say, a batch of 12 images, the color's just all over the place. It was just taking that time to balance, in between each of the images, that I think that's where I fail the most by rushing through a project. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the way I try and tackle that to make the whole series feel cohesive is I tend not to work on one image beginning to completion, move on to the next beginning to completion, and work in that way. Instead, if I have a workflow that's like 10 steps, I try and do step 1 of all 10 images, and then step 2 of the 10 images, and then step 3. And I try and work through them so they basically are all finishing at the same time, and they're all I'm working on all of them. I'm at the same stage of the game with each image kind of throughout. And I find that helps me. Well, that means when I'm getting, like, for example, if I'm getting to color, well, that means that white balance, I'm doing the white balance to all of them in the beginning, all at the same time. So I'm flipping through all of them and dealing with it all in one session. So I feel like my mind is in the same place for the whole series. And then when I come back, like what I would call my color stage is basically the last part of my stage. Then again, I'm dealing with all of them together at the same time, as opposed to maybe across different days or different hours where maybe I felt like going warmer or I felt like going cool or whatever, even if it's subconscious.
Yeah.
I feel like that helps keep the series more consistent and more fluid.
That's really interesting. I can't say that's something I've ever done. Does that mean that you've got 5-10 PSDs open as tabs in Photoshop, or you just kind of cycle through? Once that one's done this stage, you move on to the next?
Yeah, I could have a ton open at once. I mean, I'm not really ping-ponging between them. I'll once I'm into Photoshop, I'll do the blend, right? The exposure blending. For me, that's the first part. So then I'll do the exposure blending on all 10. And let's say there's 10, and then they're all blended. And then that puts me at that stage of the game where I can, if there's one room and there's 3 images, I can make sure that I kind of approached it the same way without kind of missing something.
Sure.
And in terms of the process being like non-destructive, I'm still sort of in that stage. So if I took something too far or not far enough, maybe for whatever reason the window view came back a lot in one but not in the other, I can kind of pull them towards center while they're still in that particular phase of things. Same with like luminosity or brightness. I find it helps me not push one too bright and too dark if they have to live right next to each other in the world or on a website or something like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it sounds like your retouching process is very staged. You said you start off with exposure blending. Maybe you can walk us through the sort of a complete picture of your average retouching session.
Yeah, so they all kind of go through the same steps. I would say that I have like a very set workflow, but I am always tweaking and modifying and trying to not make any rules and still stay creative and be open-minded.
Yeah.
But yeah, that said, I mean, white balance is first for sure. And I think that getting that right can make a really big difference. I will definitely get in there and start typing into the bar, not moving the slider with the mouse anymore, because that starts to feel drastic. I'll kind of bump it up 100 and actually type it in there and things like that, and just try and really dial that in.
In Capture One.
In Capture One, yep,
Yeah.
yep. And I'll addition different white balances because then I can create a layer and say I wanted maybe I think it should go warmer, but I don't want to lose where I was at. I'll put a layer, fill it, and then warm it up, and then I toggle that on and off, and I can kind of compare white balances. And then I feel like it's easier for me to make a decision on something when I can compare A or B instead of just looking at it in its own. So yeah, I'll do that. Try and get the best I can. That's when dynamic range things are happening. If I need to pull in what the whites or the highlights, which is pretty common, your bright windows, things like that, bright highlights.
And are you doing that luminosity masks typically, or?
Not usually at that stage. Just kind of like the dynamic range panel. Usually just whites and a little bit of the highlights, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Not a huge fan of lifting the shadows. Maybe that's because I'm on a Canon 5D Mark III, and they're not great. But yeah, I think the shadows are important. So if I need to bring up shadows, I'll usually just bring in a brighter exposure usually. But yeah, I'll do that stuff there. And those are the two like really big, really important things that happen at that phase. I'm not worrying too much at that phase about really recovering windows or doing any like big recoveries if if the scene has a very large dynamic range. And then I'll go through the series of images and pick them. I guess maybe just jumping back, the workflow really kind of starts on location. I'll always give a star to the one image that's the closest, like to where I want to be. That's like the best.
Yeah.
And that'll star on location, and that's the one the client sees. And at the end of the day, when they're taking pictures of the laptop with their screen, with their phone, that's the picture they're taking.
Yep.
And then I'll also be starring the other ones that I know are going to be candidates to go into the composite.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I get to the computer at home, the culling is already done. Yeah. I don't do any culling when I get back home. I've done it on location already. And sometimes it could be as specific as creating a layer and just yanking a curve or adjustment really hard and just drawing on the image and circling a particular wall or a particular window or whatever it might be, that I'm like, that's what this image is for, this piece right here. So I might take notes on location so that when I get back, I really know what I've got. So yeah, by the time I get back, I'm all cold, and I work on that. For me, it's a 3-star image. Get that as close as I can, and then take those changes and apply them where it makes sense across sort of the series, the batch. So now I have the batch that will be the composite, and the dynamic range has been tamed, and the white balance as good as I think I can get it. And then I'll do that for like all 10 images in a series. I keep using the number 10, however many there are.
Sure.
And then export it out to Photoshop. Capture One and Photoshop play pretty nicely together, actually. So I can just open those straight into Photoshop. In Photoshop, there's a tab you can stack layers. So everything that you just opened all go down to just one. Mm-hmm. Now you're all in one. They're all stacked. And then I'll go through and blend them. Could be just pen tool style masking. Could just be brushing. Could be channels masks based on color or whatever. Could be luminosity masking, whatever it takes to kind of marry everybody together into this happy image. Mm-hmm. That's probably my favorite part of it too. I feel like that's when things really come together. Yeah. You've got these pieces where you're using your imagination of what they could look like. And I'll even say that on set to clients. Oh, we're going to use our imaginations here. Yeah. This is as close as we can get, but imagine if this piece was here. And they go, okay, So that's when it actually happens. You don't have to use your imagination anymore. You've married it all together, and you've got this cohesive image.
Totally.
And then, so then I'll blend it, and then the next step, I'll actually do the retouching, which I found from what I've seen in the world to be a different time to do it than most people I see. It seems like most people do it at the very end. Okay. Would that be you? Do you do the retouching at the very end, or?
My very last step is transforming verticals and horizontals. Basically anything that's going to mess up that stack, right?
Gotcha. Yeah. Actually, you know what, that you mentioned, that's actually what I would do at this stage. Right after it's blended, I would do the verticals and stuff. And when you put it in a group, you can skew it and do all the things you can do without actually flattening it. Mm-hmm. So I'll usually just do it to the group. And then it's really just for my brain. I just don't like looking at the crooked image. Yeah. It just makes me feel a little bit better to be looking at the straight image. Yeah. So then we'll do the retouching. And the reason I do it at that stage is because if later on when you get to more creative decisions like color or brightness or whatever, if I feel like I took something too far and if the retouching is on top of your color adjustments and you feel like you took your color too far and you want to pull it back 50%, well, now your retouching will look weird because it's been based off different color or different brightness or things like that. So I'll always do the retouching next after the blend before I start messing with color and brightness so that I have a little more freedom to change my mind later and push things around without the retouching kind of holding me back there. So yeah, then so I'll have a layer of like what I call like luminosity, and that's anything that has to do with brightness or contrast or yeah, pretty much that stuff. Brightness or contrast, basically, curves, a lot of that. And then my last step in Photoshop is I just make a color folder, and that can be any adjustments to the color, whatever kind of tools will break out. And then that will pretty much be the end for Photoshop. I'll save it. It shows up in Capture One very smoothly. And then in Capture One is where I can make some final tweaks. I usually give it like a little bit of clarity, which is kind of a smart adjustment.
Yep.
And I'll usually give a little bit of warmth. That's about it. That's kind of the normal process for an image.
Okay. Yeah. And do you use any plugins or just Capture One Photoshop?
I use Lumenzia sometimes.
Yep.
I find myself making the custom masks a lot sort of by hand, either from the channels or sort of various other places I can find them. But sometimes Lumenzia just does a really good job.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And back
depends what I'm going for.
to some shooting questions in talking about dynamic range. If you've got that big blown out bay window, are you bringing your shutter speed down to kind of balance out the exterior and then hitting it with flash so that you get nice clean edges? Or do you just let her blow out and you'll fix it in a mask? How are you doing that?
No, I really like clean edges on windows. I mean, I try to let them go to a point that it feels natural, but I don't want it to feel like too perfect, which is a weird criticism, but yeah, so to tame windows I'm definitely using flash for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, either kind of your standard sort of window pull type technique or just using flash in the room mimicking the daylight but in a way that all balances out. But yeah, to tame windows definitely using a bit of flash. Sometimes they just come together on their own. Sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised, but I'm not afraid to use flash really ever if that's what it takes to tame whatever obstacle I perceive.
Yeah. You could have told me today that you are an entirely natural light photographer, and I wouldn't have questioned it. All of your images just look exceptionally natural. There's no flashiness to any of them anywhere. I would challenge somebody to find one that looks stroby. So do you... obviously, you're just kind of using it as a bit of a supplemental thing. You're trying to get it with the natural light if you can.
Yeah, definitely want to get the natural light to the best place I possibly can, assuming that the natural light is worth pursuing. You know, sometimes I just want to do something sometimes I think the image looks best if I ignore what the sun is doing completely and kind of create my own light.
Yep.
But anytime I'm using the flash, it's always motivated by the daylight. So the direction of the light, the quality of it needs to be something that I think is in line with what the natural light could do. It's kind of like if I could catch the natural light on its absolute best day at the best time possible, that's what I want my flash to be doing.
Sure.
I'm never really doing anything that I perceive as either basically impossible. Anything that wouldn't be possible, I just wouldn't light it that way.
Totally.
I might on occasion sort of invent a window that's not there. And my version of possible at that point is if the architect had built the house differently, this window would be here. But that's kind of as far as I'll stretch it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you feel like you're kind of constrained by different rules in that sense because you've got to be authentic to the architecture, or does that not even cross your mind?
Yeah, I think it's an important constraint. Yeah, I definitely try to work within that. And I think that's part of the art form, and that's part of not getting caught, if you want to think of it that way.
Okay.
I do think of that sometimes where I might do something where I'll be like, oh, that looks cool, but I'm like, it's not authentic. Like it's too far from reality, even though it looks cool.
Sure.
You know, I want to staying within the realms of reality, I think is a constraint that I try to obey. Yeah.
Okay. And it sounds like you're talking about setting up, bounce cards and silks and all the rest. And you've got a stylist with you. Do you find that you're kind of hitting an average or typical number of photos per hour?
Yeah, it's like one per hour.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really difficult time of year right now. Slowly getting better, but yeah, we're like stretching ourselves, getting like 10 in a day.
Wow.
Right now, this like winter weather,
Yeah.
and then the long days in the summer, I think we can start pulling closer to 15,
Hmm.
but those are long days.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how much pushback do you get from designers when you say to them, it's going to be a 10-hour day and you're going to get 10 photos? Are they, what the heck are you talking about? You talk to some photographers, of course, and they'll tell you that, they're delivering 30 interior design photos in a day. How do your clients react to that? I assume your existing clients, you've trained them, but what about new clients?
Yeah, so it's just something that we have a conversation about ahead of time. And I do get people that are confused and they might say, oh, well, I worked with a different photographer and we did this and that. And I just kind of just explained to them how it is. I said, this is the process. This is where we work. You've seen the images. You're telling me that you really like them.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you that they each took an hour to do.
Yeah.
And, if you need more images than that, then we can talk about a 2-day shoot or something like that. Or if a 2-day shoot is out of the question, out of your budget or whatever it might be, then I'm just not the good fit. Yeah, when I think I'm not a good fit, I do have a short list of local photographers that I'll just refer them to them. I'll send them their email addresses and phone numbers and say, hey, these are some other photographers that I know that I think are high quality. And they might be better suited to fit your needs, but that's not really how I work. And I get mixed results. I think some people say, okay, yeah, this isn't a fit, but it's not really. There's no like animosity. Like
Okay.
it's just like, okay, well, he's doing something different. He's selling apples. I need oranges. I'll go to the guy that sells oranges, kind of thing. And then, but a lot of people, I think they respect that. They if they're out of their comfort zone, then they know that there's things they don't know. And that's where it's up to me to come in and sort of educate them on at least my process, and kind of explain how things are. I mean, commercial shoots that are, I don't know, let's say something like West Elm or something that's doing catalog shoots, or Terrain or whatever, these big brands doing catalog shoots, but interior stuff, they might do 3 images in a day. And they're spending, a lot of money, and that, it can keep going. It's like, this isn't the smallest number of images in a day that you can create. There's even more tedious things where this is what I consider kind of a happy medium.
Yeah.
I also think that some people, at least I've talked to, have this misconception of how many images they need. I can think of a couple of scenarios where people said that they worked with photographers and they got 30, 40, 50 images of a project. And I say, okay, well, I was on your website and I browsed your galleries and I went through a particular project and you had like 12 or 14 images up. But you're telling me, but I'm finding out that you shot 50. Like what happened to the other 30, 35 or whatever? And and I already know the answer. And they say, oh, well, we just picked like the best ones. I'm like, okay, well, my process is to try and just eliminate any time spent to the things that you're not going to use, and we'll just try and just do as many bangers as we can, and just try and go, put 100% into each image and just create images where you're excited to use all 10 of them, or however many we deliver in a day. Yeah.
Huge credit and respect to you for maintaining that integrity for your art and your craft. I think that's a really big thing that not enough people do. I find myself guilty of it. You want to please the client, and we really need 20 shots. Can you do it in a 10-hour day? And you want to help them out and make it work, but you are sacrificing your integrity as a photographer and as an artist. Like I said, big credit to you for sticking to your guns on that.
Yeah. It also helps with the stylist too, because when they're approaching us kind of as a pair and as a team, and we're both saying the same thing, I think it resonates a little bit stronger. I feel like if it's just a photographer and just the client, it's kind of one against one, and it's a little bit more evenly matched. Whereas I think for me, when I'm working with the stylist and they come to us we're kind of like a pre-existing team, and we have
Hmm.
our existing process. And I think it carries a little bit more weight, I think. The idea of trust the process kind of a thing.
Absolutely. And I'm guessing you don't work with a photography assistant. You've just got Christy there with you. It's the two of you.
Yeah, yeah, I actually don't. Well, I have in the past for like really big jobs.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I would like to. I know I would like to work with an assistant. That's something that might start happening this year on
Yep.
my kind of to-do list. But I haven't figured out the right capacity to take somebody on. I think that what I thought I needed an assistant for is actually not it. In fact, I don't think they would really have to have much photography knowledge whatsoever, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's more like an extra pair of hands and just a brain and somebody with good work ethic and somebody that's pleasant to be around and is just genuinely interested in what we're doing.
Totally.
The technical stuff is not, with technology, it's not terribly hard to wrangle uh, all of that. You know, I'm controlling the lights from a trigger at the computer, and we have live view to see what the camera's seeing, and you can tether to the iPad and walk around the room and take pictures from outside and see them on the iPad. There's technology has really allowed you to do a lot on your own.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, moving things around and stuff that just is tangible, it just takes time.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And I'm over 20 years of always working with an assistant. And for me, I completely agree with you. They don't necessarily need to have a lot of photography experience. That's why I'm there. It's the hands, but more than anything, it's showing up on time, being really good with the client, and not just paying attention, not taking smoke breaks, not being on your cell phone, just watching and being proactive about what's coming next, and sort of instinctively knowing that, okay, this is going to be the next shot, so we need to start moving gear here or pulling this equipment out of this staging area. That's where I've found an assistant absolutely invaluable.
Yeah, yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah. Um, just kind of going back really quickly to your shooting process, one question I had was, you tend to shoot with a lot of lights off. Is your process, I'm guessing here, tell me if I'm wrong, but if you do want a lights on shot, are you kind of shooting everything lights off and then you just get that one composite frame with the lights on? Or
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So
Mhm.
that's how you're maintaining the color integrity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Okay.
and then yeah, 100%. I'll do, even if it's a lights on shot, I'll do everything with the lights off
Yeah.
and then do similar stuff again with the lights on.
Yeah.
Which I don't do a lot of. I did just actually just was editing one this morning, um, and it looks okay. But I think it's my personal preference to have the lights off. I think
Hmm.
just has a more of a high end, kind of elegant feel to it,
Hmm.
organic feel. But I do understand that designers and even architects are in the business of, by sort of extension, in the business of light fixtures and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's important sometimes to show off like what something can do or whatnot. So I understand it too.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, just going back to the, let's say 10 average shots in a day, do you do a day rate?
So yeah, so my fee structure is I'll have a day rate,
Hmm.
and that's for me on location, come out, all that, and then I have a per image fee on top of that.
Okay. So when
So
you
it's
tell a
a
client
combination.
10 shots in a day and I have a day rate, you must get pushback in that sense. That I'm only
Um,
getting this number of images and this is my day.
Not really, because the way I explain it is that the day rate is for me to show up and take the photos,
Hmm.
and the per image fee is for the editing. So it's basically, it protects me if we have a really long day and shoot a ton of images.
Hmm.
There's some extra money there to pay for the extra editing and the extra time,
Yeah.
or it protects the client if we have a short day and they actually don't need that many images. The fee can come down a little bit. But yeah, I don't do a half day. The sort of savings on a half day would be what I just mentioned.
Sure.
And yeah, I do it that way. It was kind of a difficult switch, and people don't really like to hear it. But it's just been so important for me and the way I work. It's just really worked out really well. Yeah, and then when I get the pushback on half days, I say, well, to do a half day, I have to take a full day off of the calendar. So the incentives aren't aligned there.
Sure.
So I'm willing to show up for a half day, but I still have to charge it as a day of being there because I can't do something else. So
How do you define a day? Is it sunrise to sunset, or is it a certain number of hours?
yeah, so I define it as a 10-hour day.
Okay.
But I'm pretty flexible. Like I'm used to, yeah, I define it as a 10-hour day. It's basically the fine print is it's a 10-hour day. More than 10 hours is overtime. But I know that the reality of this business can be just long days, and it's the nature of it. And I feel like my rate is fair enough for my time that I don't feel like I need to nickel and dime.
Okay.
It's kind of just I'll use the sort of overtime as kind of just to protect myself from getting taken advantage of if somebody starts to get into habits,
Yeah.
bad habits. But for the most part, we're in it kind of for the long haul. And we care about the work. We want to create the best images. I mean, if the goal was to just get in and out in 10 hours, and that meant rushing or skipping images, the client's not going to be happy. I mean, if I think it's important for me to have my boundaries on my process and things like that. But at the same time, I am willing to give on the other end to just make them feel like I'm part of the team, because I do feel like I am part of the team, their team,
Yeah.
in terms of delivering the content that they need, and making sure that we get the most that we can to maximize the effort of going out there. I know it's really difficult to get these locations to manage homeowners and get access and try and have the place clean and tidy for us. And then I know it can be difficult to book me and the stylist. I just see a lot of moving parts. So by the time we really actually get the location and we're really there and we're doing it, I'm kind of in it to win it and in it for the long haul, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great. You mentioned that you have a per image fee. Does that mean that you're not necessarily delivering everything that you shoot? Are you delivering sort of a collection of contact sheets and they can choose finals to be retouched? Or you did mention that you're starring stuff on set with the client, but are there cases where you're sort of delivering a batch of raw images and they can choose finals to be retouched?
So that's pretty rare. Normally, like what we shoot is what I deliver. And in terms of, because I actually just had this conversation recently with somebody, she asked basically that same question in terms of making selects. And I said, yeah, I do that part of the process, but I don't do it after the fact. Once we get home, that's what we're doing on location.
Right.
So the way I kind of interpret that part of the process is the idea of walking around the room, taking multiple shots from multiple angles, and we're looking at what has potential and then only pursuing what we think has the most potential. To me, that's the kind of part of the process where you're sort of making the selects. You're not picking from the finished images.
Sure.
And that's because it takes so much. We put so much time into an individual image, and there's so much effort into each one. Yeah. You don't really have the luxury of just doing a ton and just picking from them. I think the exception would be like exteriors and more like pure play architecture type stuff. Less like styled type shots, because for the exteriors, yeah, I'll run out, and a lot of times shooting handheld. If there's enough, if there's quality daylight, I can have good camera settings just handheld, maybe tripod, but yeah. So for the exteriors, it's kind of just the Brian show. I'm just kind of running around, trying to get a whole different variety and bracketing and that. And then that would be like a gallery where I'm like, okay, let me know what you want of these. Gotcha. But it's not styled. The client's not walking around with me usually, unless it's like a real like architecture shoot where they really want to be a part of the specific process of the exteriors, which I do. But then we're back to the part where, okay, there's no selects. We saw it on site. We decided on site that we really wanted it, so that's something that I'll build for.
Yeah. Okay. And then you shoot primarily for interior designers, as you said, but that, of course, naturally leads into a lot of editorial usage. You've been featured in Architectural Digest, amongst many others. How does that work? I mean, in this day and age, it seems like publications are expecting images for free, and you don't want to give them for free, but then you also don't want to piss off your client who wants to be featured in those magazines and get exposure for themselves. So how do you find that balance? And do you charge the publications? What do you do there?
Yeah, to be totally transparent, I'm still learning. I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult territory to navigate for the reasons that you just said. Um, so, uh, so for any like very legitimate publication, I'm definitely trying to get paid. Um, and I'll present a rate and then I'll see where they fall. And a lot of times I'll kind of settle for what they're willing to part with. And the logic there is like you just said, keeping the strong relationship with the client
Mm-hmm.
where they're really excited about it and they really want to be featured. In that scenario, it's like if they're featuring the client specifically,
Mm-hmm.
then I feel like that is marketing the client, which is something that's closer to being already paid for in my rate. Now, if they are doing an article where it's like top 20 trends of 2023,
Yeah.
and it's not about my client anymore, then now we've kind of departed, and I don't feel like that's really marketing for my client anymore, and that's where things can start to change. Um, so yeah, and then I almost feel like I mean I would love to talk to some of the people that you interview in the future and go back on maybe some other stuff you did and see what other people are saying, but I have a hard time getting any reasonable amount of money out of some of these publications.
Yeah.
I mean, I can get like low couple thousand sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I try for. But sometimes it seems like it's just not there. They just won't budge. I'm still learning how to kind of try and navigate some of these situations where I'm still doing myself justice and the industry justice, and still making the client happy.
Yeah.
But I think when I'm at a crossroads, when I'm really jammed up and I don't know which way to go, I lean towards making the client happy.
Yeah, no, for sure. I feel your pain. I completely agree with everything you said. I kind of, in my mind, I tend to differentiate things as well. Is it of benefit to my client? Is it serving them, or is it serving the magazine? You're obviously shooting for a lot bigger national, international publications than I ever am. So for me, it's a lot of regional stuff. Am I going to chase $50 for the licensing of the image and risk pissing off my client? No. Quite frankly, it's just... I don't want to write an invoice for $50, right? So there's that too.
A million times either.
Yeah. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head as well. I think you said something to the effect of you charge a good rate and you're comfortable with the rate that you receive. So that, in a sense, has to kind of, if the client's making up that difference, then that's okay too. You know, as long as you're happy at the end of the day with what you're making from a project. Yeah.
Yeah. I might be jumping ahead, but playing off of what we're talking about now with the publications, I do play hardball when it comes to licensing and like brands and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was something you were going to bring up, but you can imagine that I have a lot of furniture companies, lighting companies, decor, like all those types of brands coming to me that want to use. I mean, they want images for free, of course.
Yeah.
And that's when I'm much more of a stickler.
Of course.
Because it's not serving my client very well. It might sound cool
Mm-hmm.
or seem cool to be in the catalog or something like that, but they're not going to get any clients from that. It's really just bragging rights, you know?
Totally.
So I do try to pursue that, like, not aggressively, but I'm firm with that stuff. And when it's cut and dry, I'm just like, you know, take it or leave it. I was dealing with one this morning that was really frustrating, but we're getting into these gray areas with like Instagram and shop the look and these like widgets.
Yeah.
The brand I was wrestling with this morning, they, you know, they have this like web page that looks just like their Instagram feed, which is not Instagram at all. It's a third party.
Mm-hmm.
And you click the image and then the image will take you directly to, you know, that particular light fixture or whatever. And, you know, and I'm messaging them, say, hey, you know, this is outside of what you're allowed to use this for, and trying to get a fee. And they just, is a lot of pushback. Oh, we don't pay for that. Oh, we don't have a budget. And it's pretty painful. So that's something I'm trying to learn to navigate, which I run into a fair amount.
Do you get legal with that sort of stuff when they're just refusing? Is it cease and desist or?
So they're usually pretty willing to take down the image, but the one I found today, which was used multiple times, it had been up there for 2 years, and they were more than willing to take it down. But I said, hey, this has been up here for 2 years. You've already gotten the use out of it. Taking it down doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I win when my language is understanding enough mixed with persuasive enough that they'll pass me along to the right people and we can get a good solution. But sometimes they just kind of slam the door in my face. And yeah, I haven't done too much research into actual legal action, but my thought is that it's probably just not worth it, you know?
Yeah.
And that's where I'd be very curious to hear what other photographers have run into, if they've had any kind of success, or it almost seems like a class action suit might make the most sense. But I don't know. I'm a photographer, not a lawyer. So
Yeah. On one of those big platforms, it's just making a business of stealing other people's photography. That, yeah, it sounds to me like you're on the right course of action there.
yeah.
So on that note, one of my questions for you actually was, what do you think from your perspective is the biggest thing hurting architectural photographers as an industry?
Well, I think we just hit it, and ironically, I think it's one of the best and one of the worst is social media,
Yeah.
at least in my view. You know, I have to give it credit, like I did earlier, where that's where my work is able to really spread to the masses. You know, I joke that people are on Instagram and they think they're there just for fun and for entertainment, but they're really shopping,
Yeah.
whether they know it or not. You know, all of us in a different way, shape, or form, really. And so it's great that the work is able to spread and everybody's able to network and we're all able to share. And that's awesome. You know, that's why it's so popular. At the same time, it has this way of, you know, devaluing a lot of work in different ways, where kind of like we were talking earlier, somebody that might want 50 images in a shoot might want them because they feel like they need to post every single day,
Yeah.
or something like that. And 50 images only lasts, you know, let's say 60 images only lasts them, you know, 2 months of posts or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, snapshots become more common. So that really high tier professional level of work is not quite as valuable when like full on commercials for big brands are just sort of handheld, you know, iPhone type video type things. So it's bittersweet. I don't know which way the scale
Yeah.
tips.
Do you think there's
But
an element of when there's that kind of volume of mediocre to poor photography out there, that the cream rises to the top, that suddenly somebody doing the level that you're doing, suddenly it becomes just that much more noticeable?
I do, yeah, I do, and it's kind of this strange double-edged sword of the whole thing. Yeah, I think the cream rising to the top is definitely a factor, because now we're in this flood of sort of home video quality content, that when somebody puts out something that's really standout, that you can see took time to create and craft, then I think it can be that much more impactful and show that you care that much more.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that goes both ways for sure.
Yeah. And just really quickly, do you do contracts?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
This is, I mean, again, to be just completely transparent, it's something that I kind of struggle with, and I'm trying to find a happy medium.
Mhm.
I don't use them for every client. I have like my sort of like legal contract that's like 3 pages. It's my version of the one from APAlmanac,
Yep.
which I bought.
Yep.
Um, and I use it when I think it's appropriate.
Mhm.
But I find that it can be kind of scares clients off a little bit, to get this like long thing that they almost, you know, don't quite understand, and when they actually read it they get confused. It's just kind of intimidating,
Mhm.
which I understand. I mean, I read it and I feel that way too. I think it's just the nature of legal terminology. So I'm trying to find a happy medium of um, like kind of like an informal contract. I think where I want to be and where I'm trying to get is kind of like the cliff notes, like bullet point cliff notes of the contract that read in plain English quickly on like a page or half a page.
Yep.
Um, that just summarizes the contract, and they can live together, where you say, hey, this is what's in here. I respect your time, and I know you're not a lawyer, so you can read this and understand what you're signing. But for the legal, you know, for it to be legally binding and really have weight, here's the legal version. And if you want to dive into that, it's here it is. You can dive into that. So I'm trying to get something like that more standardized in my process so that I have my bases covered, but that I'm not like scaring off people and creating a whole bunch of extra emails that
Yeah,
I don't want to deal with.
totally.
My yeah, my email inbox is um, taking on a life of its own that I've never seen before, and I'm trying to figure out how to get that under control. So
Yeah, no, for sure. I can't remember how many years ago it was, but there were zero marked as read emails in my inbox. Yeah. And on the contract note, I have found for myself in my business that converting that to an online contract has been immensely helpful. Just check boxes where they can check, acknowledge to each of the points, sign their name, and send that digitally has made a world of difference. Because back in the old days when I used to, email a contract, they'd print it out, they'd sign it, they'd scan it, they'd email it, like, right, not fun for anybody. So just doing the
yeah,
online thing has been a big difference for me in my business. I've really liked it.
nice. And are you using something like DocuSign, or what? How do you do that?
It's actually through it's called WP Forms. It's in my WordPress backend, and I
Oh,
will send an actual URL through my website to the client, and it's just a list of terms, and they can check the box, accept or decline, and then at the end it says. I accept all terms as listed above, and they put their name, the project, the company name, date, and then submit, and that's it. So there's legalese in it, but it's very plain English. There's only maybe 10 terms in there. It's all just the most important ones, and a lot of them were also taken from APAlmanac's contract template, which was super helpful. And yeah, it's been great. Yeah.
great.
Anyway, I'm curious to know what does the next 10 years look like for you?
That's a really good question. Um, that's a really good question. I think that my kind of North Star is to just make sure that I'm shooting work that I constantly am kind of inspired by or kind of enjoy.
Yeah.
Knowing my personality, the way that I'll end up burning out is one by just working too hard, but also or just too much maybe, but also by falling into um, something that starts to feel a little bit too mundane or too routine. If I can keep it fresh and exciting, and try and keep things something different and keep it evolving, then I think I'll be able to continue on. I mean, I'm also very curious where technology takes us in 10 years. I
Yeah.
remember there was a point when I was deciding to take this on full time and really wondering, like, really taking time to try and think what the implications of technology will be in
Mhm.
terms of how powerful the cameras can become. Um, and I gave it a long, hard thought if this is something that I really wanted to do as a career, knowing that careers, you want it to span a long time, 10 years, like you said, at least. And, when did the cameras start to take over and do the job? Um, but I was able to sort of work through that thought process, realizing how much we physically do on site
Mhm.
because the camera's not moving furniture, the camera's not styling, the camera can't do any of those things.
Yeah.
And it became clear to me that there's so much that I physically, me and the people I work with physically do on site um, to craft the images that the camera is just capturing the sort of output of what we've sort of shaped on set.
Mhm.
So with that in mind, I was like, the camera can change the job, but I don't think it can steal the job because it can't understand the light, it can't shape the light, it can't style the scene, it can't compose. All it can do is maybe have crazy awesome dynamic range and maybe color stuff. I don't know. I don't know what the future holds, but that was something on the 10-year time horizon. I'm curious where what the implications are of that.
Yeah, well, it's good that you're thinking about it in that sense. Certainly, I've been thinking a lot about AI as of late, and I think I could be totally wrong and this could come back to bite me, but I think we're in a pretty safe space as architectural photographers. We're photographing other people's spaces, right? And there needs to be some reality and truth to that. I think though, if I were a stock photographer or a conceptual advertising photographer, I'd probably be really nervous. And a year ago, if you'd told me that I could create a photograph of an elephant sitting in a room with the lamp next to it and it's photorealistic, I wouldn't have believed you. But it's pretty crazy what's going on at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I tried using, I do all my Instagram posts with an app called Later. So I schedule on my calendar and I do them in like really big blocks, like 3 or 4 months. And I was trying to use Chat GPT to write my Instagram captions for me.
Yeah.
It could definitely write Instagram captions. Weren't in the voice that I would ever use. They were like too cheesy. So
exactly. Yeah. Totally.
But it was pretty impressive what it was coming up with. So
yeah, no, for sure. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. But you are an awesome guy. I've learned a lot actually sitting down and chatting with you, and I am super thankful for your time. It has been a real pleasure to chat with you. And if you ever find yourself in British Columbia, I'd love to buy you a beer. I feel like I could pick your brain for another couple of hours, but if we're going on, well, we're coming up on a couple hours now, so I want to be respectful of your time. And from myself and from everybody at APAlmanac, I really appreciate this time that you've taken, but also, I read the articles that you've worked with Lexi on, and you're super open, generous with your time and your knowledge and your experience, and I appreciate that, and I know a lot of other photographers do, so thank you very much.
sure. Yeah. I'm open to kind of continuing the dialogue. I do get messages on Instagram or email sometimes, just asking for sort of advice or thoughts or things like that. My way is not necessarily the right way, but I do it a lot. So I have ideas, and I'm also always trying to learn. There's so many good photographers out there, and I'm reading APAlmanac constantly and constantly finding new people and things like that. So I appreciate the wealth of knowledge that's out there, and interviews like these. I've watched many of these interviews, and it's exciting to be on the other end of it.
Yeah, no,
Helping create one, not just be a viewer. So
that's awesome. We're a small, tight-knit group. I think we got to stick together and share knowledge and experiences and all the rest. That's great. How can people find you?
sure. So the Instagram is just Brian Wetzel Photo, and website is brianwetzelphoto.com. Email address and stuff is on there. And yeah, follow me on Instagram, send me a message, and love to keep the conversation going.
Awesome. I always look forward to seeing your new images. Your Instagram feed is awesome. And you're one of the rare guys who actually updates their webpage very frequently, as I've noticed. So nice work.
Yeah, I try to. As soon as I sort of churn out a batch, it's usually kind of part of my process to add a couple to the website and try and take down some old ones and just push some stuff around a little bit just to try and keep it feeling fresh. It feels really good, actually. That's like a big sense of satisfaction I get. So I don't feel like it takes me personally much self-control to up the website. It's something I actually enjoy doing, kind of out with the old and with the new, and just staying fresh. And, sometimes we get bogged down on an image or a group of images or whatever it might be. So it is nice to kind of have the site to sort of look through and like, I create some nice stuff, and makes you feel better. So anyway, I enjoy updating it, and
that's good. Well, it's good for your SEO too, those constant updates. So
oh, good.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I'm not too good at that part of it, but
yeah, that's what they tell me anyway. I don't know. But Brian, thank you again. A huge pleasure. Really an honor to chat with you. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. We'll keep in touch.
All right. Absolutely.
All right. Take care.